Everyone, and welcome to the Creation Committee of the Affordable Housing Task Force. We do have a packed agenda tonight, and I just wanted to start with just a couple of comments around the schedule and what we've been doing so far. Certainly a recap from last week, just very briefly, is that both committees had an opportunity to sort of lay out the context of an action framework. The piece that we did not do last week was to select interventions that would be part of an action plan that this task force will recommend to Nashville. And that's why today's meeting is going to be important. We're going to take a look at some of the foundational interventions that are used to create and preserve affordable housing. Also last week, committees were able to elect their chairs. The Creation Committee's chairs are Kia Jarman, and her vice chair is Kelsey Osman. The chair's role is really around ensuring that all of you are engaged, and we are addressing priorities coming from the subcommittees. And the vice chair is really going to be helping around data and information and best practices. They are going to kick into gear next week. We've got an orientation planned with them. And we're rolling out basically a schedule of presentations moving forward. That said, this is going to change our schedule a little bit. And so I'll be getting information to you about how that changes, but we just invite your flexibility as we get things scheduled up. We are all working in a virtual environment. The task force has its timeline. And so we're trying to balance all of these, constraints as well. We do want to be focusing on interventions for the framework. There are a lot of big ideas that are floating out there. The question becomes, what are the mechanisms, the actual mechanisms that make those ideas work? So I'm very pleased that today we have some extremely knowledgeable colleagues joining us. We will have a presentation on LIHTC that will have some remarks from Jeremy Height at TDHA. We've got Ashley Brown here who will share some remarks on the Barnes Fund. And we have our colleagues from MDHA to speak about the Section 8 program. That's Norman Deep and Matt Wiltshire. And we also have Joe Kane, who's going to talk to us about the pilot program. First, after Edward Henley speaks, we're going to have Greg Claxton provide an overview of several data slides. I believe you received a copy of this deck earlier today. And so he can share with you in real time some of the analysis he's been doing. We are eternally grateful to Greg because of this just-in-time data analysis. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Edward.
Thank you, Dia. Again, thank you all of our committee members and all of our guests who will be speaking. Excited to say that we have all of our committee members present this evening, which is wonderful. Greg, we missed you last week, but we're welcoming you back with a nice warm spot on the agenda. Again, Dia gave a great overview of where we are and some of the things to come. But I did just want to emphasize that, as part of our goals, our jobs are to really develop a plan, a blueprint, a strategy. And I think that starts with an assessment of all the tools that we currently have in front of us and in our toolkit. So today you're going to hear more about that. And I want that to continue to inform us as we move forward and we develop our strategy around, are these tools being used effectively enough? Right. And so we have some very knowledgeable people here this afternoon to give us highlights, overviews, information, and a track record from a lot of these programs to inform us as we move forward. As we get through those, we will have time for a Q&A. I know from earlier and listening in on the Preservation Committee that we will be tight on time. So I won't speak very long, but I don't want that to stop everyone else from being engaged. There will be time for Q&A as we work through these. So make sure if you aren't able to ask your question as we try to keep to our agenda and keep a tight timeline, that you have a pen and a pad or somewhere to keep your questions ready because we have the folks here engaged to address those questions as well as present to us. So with that being said, and I think Greg, you'll need the mic or the baton passed to you to get going. I think it'd be good to get us kicked off. And as we go towards the back end, we will close talking about what our next steps are. So again, thanks everybody for being here this evening.
Thanks, Edward and Dia. Give me just a moment to share my screen. Okay, I have an update on some of the materials we've presented in the past, kind of the progress we're making on updating the supply gap analysis, as well as the inventory or snapshot of current affordable or income restricted units. Then I'm going to shift and talk through some of the program specific trends and forecasts that we've been able to try to put together here. All of this is very much kind of a work in progress. We're kind of getting data and getting advice from task force members on how to think about and use the data pretty much in real time. So there are, kind of lots of issues for us still to work out, but I think, the bits and pieces that I'm presenting tonight are coming a little bit more into focus. Okay, so I think this should, generally be familiar. We've looked at it a time or two in the past, and it's our attempt to update the EPS study from a few years ago. My colleague Nick Lindemann has been working on this with the most recent census data from 2019, and has been, sort of pulling together and estimating the supply of homes, both rental and owner, available at these different, or that, kind of overall in the market at these different income levels, as well as the number of households, the demand side at each of these different income levels. To do this kind of broad countywide analysis takes a lot of assumptions and simplifications that I won't get into, but a lot of those deal with, in particular, how you translate home values to monthly mortgage costs. So this is still a work in progress. There's some things we're sort of reviewing and checking on. In particular, we're working to update an analysis we did from a couple years ago of the same thing for 2017 to show kind of how it's changed over the last 2 years. So, again, sort of the key takeaways is the continued very large gap on the very lowest end of the spectrum, focused on the rental side. The next thing that I want to provide an update on is the snapshot of affordable housing inventory. This is where we've been trying to consolidate a lot of different data sets and make sure that they're kind of all viewed through the same lens. We don't have duplication. We understand what kinds of projects are constructed versus which projects are in the pipeline or have funding approvals. But we've been able to get, at least kind of on the unit count side, data sources from the Barnes Fund, LIHTC, and THDA, as well as the National Preservation Database. We think we've got those pretty well synthesized right now. That's the units that are shown there. There's a handful of things that we think are other sources of affordable units that we need to bring in. We think there are some housing fund properties that are deed restricted. We think there may be some missing project-based vouchers. We've got that list from MDHA, so we're going back to review that. Next step for this is to try to fill out some of the data that lurks beneath the unit counts. So, like I said, making sure we understand which ones are in existence and completed, and which ones are merely proposed or pipelined. Filling gaps where we don't have data right now on when projects expire, or if they're going to serve in perpetuity, and then see what we can do to sort of clarify the income level that these serve. Now, one of the things, as we round this out with the expiration dates, one of the things we can do is start using it to look forward. And this is a chart we've presented a version of in the past. Here, for units that are not associated with MDHA that have expiration date, we can kind of show through 2030 how those units drop off over time. Obviously, that's built on a foundation of units that are more or less in perpetuity through MDHA. And then we've also added the count of current available housing choice vouchers. This is kind of the maximum number of vouchers that MDHA can issue right now. We've just held that steady right now. We'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. And then shifting gears, I'm going to talk through the program level historical trends and projections now. I'm going to start with LIHTC and spend the most time on this to introduce some of the issues that we have in kind of putting these projections together, and then talk through Barnes and Pilot. So the solid line on the chart here is the historical trend of new units added each year since 2000. Obviously, LIHTC is a longer term project. There are more sort of submerged iceberg units that have been created in the past, but this is sort of the recent productivity of housing units through the LIHTC program. And so as a starting point, what we did is we looked at what the recent trend was. So looking since 2015, on average, how many units were created each year, and that comes out to 123. And so this is the technique that we use for the other programs as well, but we're doing just a very, very simple straight line analysis of just, if what happened in the past, over the past 5 years, continues happening over the next 10 years, how many units would that produce? And so 123 projected forward for 10 years produces 1,227 units. Now, obviously, that is a massive, massive simplification, of whether what's gone on in the past will continue to hold in the future, what other market changes, program changes, whatever else. But it's just sort of a simple straight line extension. Now for LIHTC, we've got one additional point of data that we wanted to bring into this to help think about maybe another projection. And that is the number of units that THDA sent around last week, I believe, that they're tracking is in their pipeline. So these are approved but not yet completed. And so that count is 2,500 units. Now, Jeremy and I and a member of his staff talked this morning about how to think about that 2,500 unit pipeline, because for various reasons, they think that there's a larger number of units in the pipeline than we would expect year to year, realistically over the next 10 years. So we've kind of talked through kind of a range of ways to think about that, and thought that maybe 400 units annually might be a reasonable sort of high level upper end number of how much LIHTC might be able to support over the next 10 years. So if we take that 400 units per year and project it forward for 10 years, that produces about 4,000 units. Here, I just want to emphasize these are very, very simple projections. They're not intended as a deep, nuanced set of, this is what we think is the best estimate. I'm always comfortable with a range of outcomes. So somewhere between 1,200 and 4,000 could seem reasonable. Okay, so that's the projection that we have for LIHTC. Because it's got these pipeline units. I'm sorry, the last thing to note is, as I mentioned before, with the snapshot of affordable units, we're still reconciling which data sets are based on completed constructed units and which data sets are based on funding approvals or funded or approvals or something. And we're trying to reconcile that a little bit. So there's going to be a little bit of oddity as you compare LIHTC, which is a little bit more, this trend line is based on completed units versus Barnes or Pilot, which is based on approvals. So just keep that in mind among my many, many caveats. Okay, so shifting now to the Barnes Fund. Here we're looking at non-rehab funding of units, the trend going back to the creation of the Barnes Fund, again in the solid line. Since 2014, it took a couple years for it to really get underway and get to its current sort of general funding level. So what I took a look at was the number of units created each year since 2016. That comes out to 623. Again, pushing that forward just very, very simply for 10 years, we get 6,850 units. talking with Ashley, we know that by and large, most Barnes Fund projects overlap with LIHTC. There are some that don't. These seem to primarily be rehab, which we've already pulled out, but that's something I'm going to continue to work through with her to identify if there's any other sort of gaps between or differences between LIHTC and Barnes. So that's the Barnes trend and projection. And then last, we're looking at the pilot program that supports LIHTC through MDHA. Again, this is looking at cumulative approvals for new funding over the past since 2016 in the solid line. That averages about 573 units a year, and then pushing that forward for 10 years, we get about 5,700 units. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is, as I kind of mentioned a few different times, these aren't separate programs. These are different ways that we bring different resources to bear, primarily to support LIHTC projects. So, these aren't, so one useful thing about this is, if you're focusing on the high projection for LIHTC right now, that's about 4,000 units over 10 years. Barnes is about 6,800 units over 10 years, pilot at about 5,700. Those are thinking about those as kind of different ways of projecting the same total, and they're winding up in, roughly the same space, maybe 4,000 to 6,000 units. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Is there's a lot of things still to clarify and make sure we're not double counting or duplicating, and we've got all the same stuff in there. But looking maybe at these three programs working jointly together to produce something like 4,000 to 6,000 units over the next 10 years. With that, I'm happy to turn it back to Dia or over to Jeremy or Edward, whoever wants to queue up what's next.
Greg, did you want to share just the section 8 information as well? Why don't we do that in one fell swoop, and then we can have our speakers tee up.
All right. Okay, and then we did a similar exercise. MDHA sent the funding amount approved, as well as the maximum number of vouchers last 20 years or so. What we're showing up here in the solid line are the maximum number of vouchers they can issue. Matt's going to get into sort of the wrinkle of how that works, but it's just sort of their capacity for number of households they can support right now. You can see how that rises over time. I think Matt will also get into kind of where the sources of those increases come from, because it's a little bit more complicated than the pilot and the LIHTC side of things, or the pilot and the Barnes side of things. But then just for caution, because we're still working through this a little bit, we've just kind of flatlined that at the top. If we did a similar trend analysis, it would come out to about 40 units a year. So that's kind of the housing choice voucher side of things. We got counts on the project-based vouchers. I need to pull that out of this count and shift that over to the snapshot of the inventory. But I don't think it's going to have a big impact on these numbers. It's relatively modest. All right, Dia.
Good deal. Thank you, Greg. We're now going to turn the mic over to Jeremy Height from TDHA to talk a little bit about the LIHTC program.
All right, thanks everybody. I guess we'll start off kind of defining the LIHTC program. It's designed to help finance private development for the preservation or development of affordable rental housing. It uses federal tax credits to offset construction costs. As Greg mentioned, it is a program that has been in existence since 1987. THDA has administered that program for the state of Tennessee since its inception. To give you a little more background so that you have a foundation of exactly what the program does, it offers a financial incentive for that construction or rehabilitation of housing that will help households earning 60% or less of the area median income. It offers investors a dollar-for-dollar reduction in their federal income tax liability over a 10-year period. So when you hear an award from THDA for a certain dollar amount, that then goes over 10 years and it is cumulative. Each year, the IRS allocates federal tax credits to states based on population size. Tennessee gets about 20 to 21 million per year. The credits are then allocated and paid out to developers and awardees based on our federal and state priorities, which are established in what we call the Qualified Allocation Plan, or you might hear it referred to frequently as the QAP. That plan is adopted by the board of THDA as well as the governor. And then it establishes those priorities and a competitive process to award the credits available to developers. For the program, we maintain a compliance period. The state has extended that period for a 30-year window of affordability. That is in addition to well, it's 30 years total in Tennessee. There is a federal mandate for at least 15, and Tennessee has decided to extend that an additional 15 for a total of 30 years of compliance in the program. It's also something that's hard to mention housing credits without going into two other additional resources. The first one is the Tax-Exempt Bond Authority that allows private developers to finance construction or preservation of affordable rental housing through the sale of tax-exempt bonds. Developers often use a mix of the tax credits and the bonds to make their affordable housing developments financially feasible. We also have the Community Investment Tax Credit, which financial institutions get a tax credit towards their franchise and excise taxes for making loans and investments or grants to nonprofits and other entities like public housing entities that are doing housing or capability building activities. Just to give you a size and scope of this program, our research division puts out THDA's impact by the numbers, essentially. The housing credits program has put out in the last year that the data is available $651.1 million in allocated credits to create 6,340 available affordable rental units. We also issued $286.1 million in multifamily bond authority to assist in financing 3,036 of these units and an additional 52 market rate units. Lenders received their community investment tax credits on their investment of $236.1 million in below market loans or contributions to eligible nonprofits to assist 1,859 households through a range of housing services and to create and preserve 470 units of owner-occupied affordable housing. We've talked a little bit about some of the impacts of those programs and how they fit together. Greg mentioned some of the challenges of doing the forecasting. In particular, we have been warning developers for several years now that the amount of multifamily bonds that we have been able to allocate towards multifamily may change going forward. For the past several years, we've been the majority recipient of those bonds for the state, but they could be taken by other resources or other requests for resources through the Economic Community Development Division to allow for private activity that's eligible under those bonds. It's hard to forecast that because you just don't know who's going to ask for them and for what projects. We, like I said, have been the benefit of most of the tax credits that have, or the bonds authority that's come to the state. That has let us do things like make sure that there was a large amount available to anybody who wanted them, basically, for the last several years. That is going to change going forward. THDA last year expanded our debt capacity limit under the state law to $4 billion. And while they gave us that extra room under our cap, it was with an unspoken caveat that we couldn't continue to raise that debt ceiling and keep issuing bonds. So we have done some things to hopefully lower our reliance on those bonds. But our primary business is the single family mortgages that we issue, and we use that bonds that come to us for that purpose, and it's going to be our primary purpose. So multifamily bonds is a secondary use of those funds if they're available. The last several years we've had bonds in 700 million, 600 million, we did 500 million last year. So it's us using a large majority of that for our primary function, and that if someone else starts drawing in on those bonds, it will leave less for the multifamily developers. So we've kind of forecast that to everybody, and that would affect the numbers that Gregory was talking about putting forward. If you can't match all those deals up here in Davidson County, which most of them use bonds and tax credits, that may affect the numbers that you get together. The other thing that we've done, and we've seen some activity at the federal level, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act was put forward to stabilize the value of the non-competitive 4% credits. That was supported by almost all of the entire Tennessee delegation and the House of Representatives. They all signed on as co-sponsors except for one. And I'm happy to take any questions as far as what we could do, or if you have any later, if we're doing that at the end.
It might be easiest if we have all of our panelists speak and then we open for full questions. So Ashley, would you like to jump in now and talk a little bit about Barnes?
Sure, I love to talk about Barnes. So my name is Ashley Brown. I'm the Affordable Housing Program Manager for the Mayor's Office of the Barnes Fund. So I came on board in November, and so I'm technically still pretty new to the housing world. So I actually look at you all as the experts. I'm just the expert on Barnes, and I've been learning so much from all of you. My background is in grants management, so housing is still a little bit new to me, but this has been a great crash course. So I'm really grateful to you all for your expertise, and I've learned so much sitting in on some of these meetings. That being said, so I came on in November, and Hannah Davis is now the Director of Housing, and I manage the Barnes Fund exclusively, which builds a little bit of capacity for us since Hannah was split between so many things beforehand. Since the Barnes Fund was founded in 2013, they've awarded 44,421,000. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. I'll slow down. $44,421,688. We do have a spring funding round that will close on Tuesday next week with the commission voting on awards then. So we'll be awarding some more to add to that pot of funding, which is always exciting. We have been able to give out those funds and help nonprofits leverage $234,804,080 in leveraged funds, which means they go out and get that's their total project cost minus the actual award that they get from Barnes. So a big difference there. In addition to funding dollars, we also donate in-kind Metro back tax lots. If you were to add those 84 Metro lots that we've donated since 2013, that adds an additional $4,191,000 to that total pot of funding available for our grantees. We do only award nonprofit developers. Some of you are recipients of those funds, so I won't bore you too much with the application process, but we do also have the chair of the Housing Trust Fund Commission on this particular subcommittee as well, Gina Emanuel. So she can tell you all a little bit more about the commission process for oversight of Barnes funding. But we do have kind of a big job in front of us as far as our data cleanup over the last couple of years, just since 2013, just deciphering what the addresses are, which properties overlap with LIHTC, and some of those things. So there's a lot of data cleanup to be done. Hopefully with our our added capacity, we'll be able to do that pretty efficiently. In addition to those things, we're really looking at some goals for the future of the Barnes Fund, primarily the sustainability of the Barnes Fund, diversifying our funding overall to make sure that not only are we building capacity within the Barnes Fund, but we're also helping build capacity in the nonprofits that we're funding, and creating long-term more sustainability, not only for our fund, but to be able to grant those dollars, but also creating more developers in Nashville, creating affordable housing, both through preservation and creation of those units. We also we're thinking a lot about geographical equity within Davidson County and where those units are being placed as part of our application process and how we can better build that into our application. We are also thinking more about the wraparound services and the population served by those nonprofits, both through their programming as it's provided and through the folks that they're moving into those units after they're created. We're also thinking a lot about how we promote and leverage the story of Barnes. I think Barnes is kind of a hidden gem as it applies to Metro, and it's not something that a lot of folks know about in some ways. If you're in the housing community, you do, but I think that outside of that, Barnes is still a little bit unknown, and we haven't really been able to tell our story in a compelling way that would actually bring in more diversified funding for barns. So I think that's something that's on our radar a lot as well. And then also we're always thinking about how we're reducing our barriers to inclusion as part of our application process. And not only through our application process, but the monitoring process. How can we better bring first-time developers or folks that are primarily focused on services and programs who are maybe getting into housing for the first time? How can we better bring them in and give them the kind of peer learning that they need to be able to be successful in the long term, and perhaps do more affordable housing as part of their programming and the services that they provide? So that's a lot of information, and I talked really fast, so I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to be here and join us.
Thank you, Ashley. I think at this time, we will move the mic over to Joe Kane, who covers the pilot program. And then we can answer some questions there and then go on to section 8.
Good evening. It's good to see everybody this evening. I am glad to be here talking about the pilot program. The pilot program that Metro has, MDHA administers, was created under a change in state law in 2015. We can partner with projects which have received low-income housing tax credits and can offer them the ability to make a payment in lieu of taxes to help reduce their tax liability. We have found this to be extremely important for the initial years of the project. We review everybody's pro forma when we're taking a look at the projects that are coming in. And all the projects need that break in the beginning to make the projects work. We elevate their annual pilot payment on a regular annual basis. Is increased so that up until after year 10, when the pilot expires, that the project should be able to stand alone on itself. That allows the possibility that the tax assessor would come in and value the tax credits as income to the project, which throws the numbers completely off for affordable housing. So we've been glad to do that, and over the last several years, we have done very many of these. Metro has authorized us 100 to be able to do. $2.5 million. I'm having the same issue, talking too fast. $2.5 million annually in potential tax abatement. We have never used that. We got closest last year with the tax increase, was the closest that we had come with that. But I have a slide to show you the what we have been able to do. And I hope I have this correct. Let me make this a little bit larger if you can see this. I've isolated this out or subdivided this into new developments that have come online. 2017 was the first year in which the projects were awarded a pilot, and we had 256 units take advantage of that on two separate projects. 2018, you can see that by the numbers that the word has started getting out. With that, we had 583 new units that were developed. 966 units were rehabbed and able to keep their affordability going on into the future, and that was 564 of those were with Tribeca Towers, which was their restrictions were starting to expire on that, and we were able to, through a lot of help with THDA, almost exclusively through THDA, been able to maintain that affordability in those in those two towers. 2019, 585 new units, and this is when they start going. They have not quite yet come online, as you can tell. The new construction takes a while for them to come online. Our pilot kicks in the year, the January 1st after they are completed with that. So this is when we start, this is where you got new construction in the pipeline coming on. And in 2019, we Metro Council approved 585 new affordable housing units under the pilot program. And in 2020, we did 1,103 new units. So the program has been very successful. Again, it only works with LIHTCs. So we have that limitation on what we can do with it, but it is one of the layers in making these projects successful. And we are seeing a lot of interest in people doing more affordable housing, which is great. And I have here a slide of some pending projects that we know of that are somewhere in the pipeline coming through. They have either made application with THDA and are awaiting award of the 4% credits, or we have had conversations with them ourselves outside of that, or a combination of both. And as you can see, we have almost 1,200 new units that are potential to come online this year. I'm sorry, it's 2,100 units that are in the potential to be able to come online. Unfortunately, we know that THCA does not have enough money to fund all these with the LIHTC. There's just, as went through the analysis with that earlier, there's just not enough there to be able to do all of these, but we do have at least that many projects in the pipeline should funding become available to be able to do that. So I am, that is the data that I have to be able to share with you. I think it's been a great program. We are very pleased with it. You know, we have council member on board here listening tonight, and this program has been very receptive in Metro Council since its inception. When it first came out, we had to explain how it worked, and council got on board with that, understood it's all part of a layering process, understood that this really is not a negative cost to the city of Nashville, because the minimum amount that a pilot can be must exceed what the existing property taxes are on a piece of property. And so there's not a loss of current income coming into the city. Now, obviously, it's a reduced thing for when it's developed, so they would be getting more income after the development, but it's not a negative on an existing budget coming in as far as cash going out. So it's been very successful. We like it, we love it, and we are so pleased that it has been able to produce as many units here in Nashville.
Thanks, Joe. I think at this time we're going to pause and just take questions for Jeremy, Ashley, and Joe before we proceed to the presentations on Section 8. This is primarily because LIHTC, Barnes, and Pilot work very closely together. So, Edward, have you help me be sure that as hands get raised, we capture everybody.
If I'm on it, I don't see any hands at the moment. Beth, I see your hand.
Thank you. So Gregory pointed out earlier that the biggest deficits are for the poorest households, those below 30% of area median. I know LIHTC normally isn't affordable to folks at that level without being matched with Section 8s. Can you give us a sense with all of these programs of just what we mean by affordable? Affordable at what level?
I can answer for Barnes. So we primarily, we fund anything below 80% AMI. The three groupings that we use are below 30%, between 30 and 60%, and 60 to 80%. The most of what we fund falls between 60 and 80%, and then some in the 40 range. The amount that we fund below 30 is definitely less than that, the rest of those percentages of AMI. But we are seeing more applications come through that do include below 30% AMI. They're just fewer and far between than I would say anywhere between 40 and 80%.
I will answer the pilots. The pilots that we see coming through, most applicants are using income averaging today, which means that the average household income of people in all the units is below the 60% median income. The advantage to that is that it allows someone who may get a raise or whatever becomes over income is still a qualified tenant inside the units, but they will all average 60% or below over the time period. And again, that's straight up the rules under the LIHTC program.
So I would submit we've got a bit of a mismatch. These programs are great. They're producing housing for people who need it, but they're not addressing our biggest deficits.
No, agreed and highlighted. I think, Kelsey, I see your hand is up.
Jeremy, I think you mentioned that most folks in Davidson County are pairing tax credits with bonds. Could you elaborate on why that's the case?
It's been a combination of the size of some of the developments that have been proposed and put into service or in the pipeline here in Davidson County. Typically, a tax credit project across the state is somewhere in the 125 units. But we've had several here in Davidson County, as you saw that in the list that was sent around, that are well over that 200, 300. We have a couple that are in the 400 range. And to make those feasible and make those work, that's one of the things they have been able to pair with that is the bonds.
And do you know if the data shown earlier, does that include both the 4% and the 9% credits?
Yes.
Are you good, Kelsey? Okay, great. I saw Matt's hand, and then I see Dwayne.
So trying to figure out what the gating item is on the creation of additional units. Maybe I'll start with Jeremy. I mean, Joe, it sounds like the pilot program supports this, but we haven't hit capacity on that. But with Barnes and to Jeremy, what are the things, without providing any commentary on whether we should or shouldn't, or it'd be fair or not fair, what are the things that could be changed in the QAP that would produce more affordable housing units in Davidson County?
That's a tough question. Every time there's changes to the QAP, there are both the intended consequences and the unintended consequences. I've had a lot of conversations with Donna Duarte, who's on my staff. She was our multifamily director for a while and was responsible for the most recent QAP, except for this year. And you know, every time we tweak that, we've tried to make it so that it's competitive across the state, so that it's spreading the developments not just into one area or one community. And it's a challenge to try and find ways to make that a process that's both fair, equitable, and goes where the needs are. There's always fights in those QAPs between the developers about what scoring system we should use, what points we should award for certain things. So it's a bit of a juggling act, and there's a lot of things to pull at. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly what the consequences are. We did have some things where, for example, we tried to encourage in-state developers. What happened was in-state developers started taking commissions basically from out-of-state developers to be their quote-unquote partners just to get them in the door. You know, we've also awarded points now for things like developers who've done more projects with THDA. So that gets them in. We try to encourage them to start small, you know, with the 4% and then build up to doing 9% deals once they have a track record with us of how they perform. It's a juggling act, and I wish I had a better answer than we can try, but those discussions involve a lot of different parties and a lot of different competing needs. We also try to schedule pools for things like some of the priorities that the state has for ex-offenders, children aging out of foster care, seniors, veterans. So there's all these competing priorities, and whether you can find a development that fits those needs and is feasible financially is a real challenge. That's just up to the developers to find those.
Ashley, did you want to address that before we moved on?
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, I certainly understand. I'm putting both you and Jeremy in a difficult position. You're having to make commentary on things, but I'm really asking, like, I understand there's a fairness question, and Ashley, I understand you don't write the Metro budget, but like, if there were more funding, would more units be created, or like, nope, you're at capacity, so that's not even something we should think about?
Right
for
now,
us,
oh,
go ahead.
well, okay, I'll put $5 in the jar to go first. I think the easy answer to your question right now is kind of a simple yes, just because we normally receive a requested amount over what we have in our actual funding pool to give out. So the easy answer to that is yes. If we could fund every single project, there would be more units. Now, would the project quality be the exact same if we just funded every single application that we received? I don't know. That's a different question. But I know that we still, at this point, we don't push barns as an option for folks. Really, we don't leverage our story. We don't encourage people to apply. A lot of the people that are applying have known about barns for a long time. And so we get a lot of repeat folks that come through the barns program. So if we were going out and soliciting more applicants for more projects and encouraging people to do more things and saying, hey, we have this money, you can go out and do these things and you can apply for money from us, the unit count would be higher. However, we're not doing those things right now because we're not even meeting the base requirement for what has been requested thus far. Even in this most recent funding round, we have a 30% over ask from what we actually have available in our funding pool. So that's a long answer to your question. I think I've danced around the issue quite effectively, but of course I would love more money to give out, is the crux of it.
Yeah, and we've done that. The push for our things, as far as more available funding, it's a federal thing, so it's not something we can directly impact here in the state, except through our representatives in Congress. So we've talked to them. They did pass some of the Improvement Act, things that help stabilize some of the credits. There's been talk about expanding the amount of credits available. From the QAP perspective, I will say, you know, there are attempts to put in there like the county needs score. Right now, Davidson County has a score of effectively 0 because of the projects that have come into this community, the bonds that have been put into those projects, as well as past developments and some of the tax credits that came back. So it's a challenge then if you're going to make a deal in Davidson County, it's got to be competitive when the need score, the points you get for the need score is 0 here in Davidson County. We can argue whether that's fair or not, but that's under the current process. That's where it's at. And we do have other mechanisms that are coming into play. There is some credits that are coming as part of the disaster from 2020. I think we're getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 million credits that can go to projects in the 5 declared counties, which includes Davidson. We're going to try and fund at least one project in each of those areas, each of those counties. And then if there's still projects available, maybe they weren't the highest scoring, but they're the next highest scoring on the list, regardless of which county, that's where we'll start filling those in. So that's 2 rounds of potential funding this year. And when we have gotten additional tax credits in the past, that's what we have done, is tried to make that somehow fair and equitable and put them into use. I mean, obviously the goal is to make more housing in Tennessee, and putting it where the need is very high on the list.
I appreciate that insight, Jeremy. And Matt, I think you're right. You teed up a question that's not really easy to answer, but it's one that definitely needs to be asked for sure. Dwayne, I see your hand is up. I don't know if you had to step away, but wanted to highlight your question if you wanted to ask it.
No, my only comment was that the trends and forecasting list discusses tax credit, barns, funds, and pilots. And for the most part, those all go to construction. Best question was about getting to lower income individuals. And that really is more of a subsidy issue that Section 8 can really help address. And with respect to Jeremy's slides and information, I think it would be helpful for people to know the amount of funds over the last 4 or 5 years that have come to help construct or develop the units, not just the number of units. I think the number of funds with respect to tax credits would far exceed, at least over the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of funds from Barnes and Pilot. But that, I think, would be interesting for the group to have.
Greg, for the record, the development cost, I think, is caps out at 1.6 million per development. So you might be able to just do the rough calculation math on that, as opposed to us doing research.
That's primarily a 9%.
Yeah.
For the last couple of years, in order to do the construction that many very, very competent developers have done in town, they've had to exceed that cap significantly.
No, good point, Dwayne. I don't see hands, but I do have a question. Well, I do see Councilmember Suar, so I'll turn it over to you after this question. Joe, I saw in your list on your spreadsheet, we had kind of seen a dip a little bit in the unit count, but I wanted to highlight and maybe ask you about the basically the absence of rehab, right, over the past 2 years in that unit count. And I just wanted to know if you had insight into that. Is that because there's not stock available to pursue those types of projects, or if you've heard any feedback from those who traditionally have been pursuing rehab and why that's not happening now?
Again, this goes back, we work on what receives credits. But I think, I think insight into the real estate market is that the units are flipping and we're losing that affordability on the rehab. The private owner has those, also that may or may not have ever had LIHTC in it. May have just had some Section 8 tenants in there, or may have been affordable just by nature because they weren't that big, or where they were located, or what kind of condition they were in. They were naturally affordable. And I think what's happened is the market is grabbing those right now because the market is so hot, and they're not, and they're flipping them, essentially fixing them up, and they're in what was affordable, or maybe borderline affordable, or maybe even workforce, now is turning into market and above. And I think that's probably what's happening with the market. As far as us, we're not turning them down. So we would love to have more rehabs come in. We do have one that is coming in for this year. So, I mean, but no, you're absolutely right. The more was for new construction.
We talked about this a little bit this morning in the other subcommittee. Tribeca Towers was one of those success stories about someone who came in and acquired it and has rehabbed it. That was a $62 million bond investment from us, as well as some other 4% credits. was 14% of the available senior housing in Davidson County. So saving that from going to a market rate or some other type of development was a big success. And those are hard to find. And you got to find a developer who's willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Jeremy. Those are few and far in between, but a great example.
Yeah, I was going to weigh in here. I think one of the biggest tricks when it comes to like more rehabs versus new construction is just the structure of the LIHTC program, which requires that the owner have owned it for at least 10 years prior to being able to be purchased in an ACA rehab structure for LIHTC development. There's a few waivers from that, one being Section 8, which is why you see so many Section 8 towers that are on the ACA rehab list now and not as many just traditional LIHTC or even market to affordable transactions. Those unfortunately just don't exist today, and those opportunities don't exist today either, just with the pricing of apartment complexes, not only in that, but just in the country. So we're not going to see a lot of rehabs in this kind of market environment at the moment.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Hunt. I think it highlights that we're up against it, right? I mean, we're fighting something that's coming at us fast, hot, and heavy. Councilmember Suara.
Thank you. I don't know if Matt or Joe spoke about this, but I wanted to check Joe specifically with the pilot program. My understanding is that right now, the way we have it, it's only for projects that qualifies for LIHTC already, that got LIHTC. And my understanding is that we have a lot of projects that do not have LIHTC, but would like to have a pilot. If I understand correctly, this is something set up at the state level. If that were to change, would that allow us to be able to have more units produced where we are able to do pilot as a county for programs that are not for projects that have not received LIHTC? Is that a way to look at that? Joe.
I'm sorry. Yes, that would be that would be. I thought you were. I apologize. That would be a way to do that. Right now, it is only the LIHTC. You're absolutely correct. And if state law changed, that could open it up to some more mixed income. It could open it up to some mixed use. It could open it up to a lot of potential on there. And it would be, it would be up to us, the city, and this committee recommendations as to what type of projects we would want to go in there and what type of income levels we would want to be addressing as part of the overall program that would ultimately then be approved by you and Metro Council.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I wanted to highlight that is to say that that's an hindrance that we have there at the state level. But I also want to make sure that I mention to members of this committee that there is a bill that is already filed in the state legislature by Representative John Ray Clements. Chief Yabro is the Senate sponsor. House Bill 0818 that is actually looking into changing that recommendation for the pilots that would allow us to do that. I wanted to mention it to the committee because that is something that would help. And if we have colleagues outside of Davidson County that we can ask to join in that to help us make sure that bill passes, then we can do more with our pilots than what we're doing right now and be able to use up the 2.5 million every time that we assign it so that we can have more units built. So thank you.
Yeah, hey, Councilwoman Suara, I think one of the things that we haven't spoken to about the situation for the pilots that Joe usually always mentions is the fact that the reason that we have to have a pilot program today is because of a case law in the state with the city of Spring Hill, and effectively without a pilot, affordable housing properties during their first 10 years while the credits are flowing are more or less double taxed in the state. And to put it kind of into dollars and cents, we own 66 units in Bordeaux off Clarksville Pike, all townhomes and 3-bedroom units. that it's 100% affordable, and for Dr. Shin, that's 60% and below. And so our average rent out there is probably in the neighborhood of $850 to $900 a unit, and for a while we were spending somewhere around $2,100 to $2,300 a unit a year in taxes. So we were effectively collecting rent for the first 2.5, 3 months just to pay our property taxes. And so when Dr. Shin asked how can we produce more units for people at below 30% AMI, well, 30% AMI rent's half of that, and with taxes being where they are, the state being the case, and just general operating expenses, you can't even break even operationally, even if all of the construction costs were grant dollars and there was no loan here. So there's not enough money, honestly, without some sort of rental subsidy to reach those units, much less when you have a state program and its case law. So it would take an actually act of the governor and the legislature to turn over. So that's the reason for the pilot, and that's why it exists today. And it's been tried. Wayne Barrett can speak to it at length of how many opportunities we've had to try to overturn that at the state legislature, and it's been voted down every time by the rural jurisdictions who enjoy the double taxation because it's a big part of their tax receipts. So just give it a little context there.
No, thanks for that, Hunter. I saw a couple hands that did drop. I will say if you did want to still ask, please raise your hand. If not, I'll turn it back to. I see Kelsey. Kelsey, would you go ahead?
For Jeremy, I know at some point we were kind of running the risk of LIHTC properties expiring at that 15-year mark, and I know THDA has done work to prevent that. Is there still that risk, even though the compliance is 30 years, is there still that risk of losing a property at 15 years?
Yes, for programs or for properties that were under the old rules, yes. Going forward, that will be less of an issue. They will all go to 30 years, but the ones that have expiration dates in that spreadsheet, that is when they would be able to opt out of the program.
Great. Edward, I think this is a great time to turn our attention to Section 8. I know we've got Matt Wilshire teed up. We certainly have Norman Deep on board. So I think we should turn it over to our colleagues at MDHA, and we can pick up other questions after they present.
Great. I arm wrestled with Norman and lost, and so I get to do the presenting. But just want to give all the credit where credit is due, which is to Norman and his team. They do a really fantastic job managing the Section 8 program for Nashville. So in short, what you heard from LIHTC is that there are dollars that go into construction that retain affordability, help make projects happen, and they charge rent at a certain level, essentially such that it's affordable for individuals making 60% of area median income. And there's actually some income averaging. We can get into some other specifics. Section 8 works differently. There's a federal allocation that comes to MDHA. We have a small admin fee that pays for the staff that administers that program. Very much like the community development program that Mel Alexander, one of the committee members, manages, that we manage grants, have a small admin fee, and then deliver service for the city. Section 8 works the same way. We receive an allocation from the federal government. Folks who qualify, and you can qualify to receive a voucher if you make up to 80% of area median income, but folks who get a voucher, take that voucher to the private market and rent an apartment from an apartment owner, private apartment owner, who agrees to participate in the Section 8 program. As a part of their participation, they agree to set their rents to certain levels based upon bedroom size and other criteria. And that's essentially the fair market rent is sort of where we set that. We'll talk about those rents in just a second. But Norman and his team inspect those units, make sure that they're high quality and provide a good home for individuals. The individual then pays between 30 and 40% of their income in rent. There's a calculation that goes into that. Norman can get into the more of the specifics of that, but essentially the individual pays 30 to 40% of their income in rent, and then the voucher covers the balance. The average in the Nashville market, that the value of that voucher is about $700, which is an important factor. But the most important thing to understand is it remains affordable based upon how the life experience of the voucher holder and their income changes. If the voucher holder makes more money, then they pay more of the rent, 30% of their income, and the voucher takes up less. And the voucher dollars effectively can be utilized to support other individuals who are receiving housing through the Section 8 program. But it is, the program is constrained by three factors. The first and most important and most critical right now is the funding that we receive from HUD. The second is the units available. Are there private landlords who are willing to have their units rented? And then the third is the number of vouchers that we have allocated. And I'm speaking of vouchers sort of in one category. There are subsets of vouchers. There are vouchers that Norman and his team manage for veterans who are experiencing homelessness. There are vouchers that we give to the Homeless Impact Division that are specifically for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. There are vouchers for elderly, non-disabled. And so there are some various segments of the vouchers, but in general, the vouchers all function the same way, which is someone qualifies, takes a voucher, takes it to the private market and rents an apartment, which is great because I may want to live in Donaldson, but someone else may need to live in Bellevue. Somebody else may need to live in Antioch because of their job or their network or their community, their church, whatever is important to them. And so there is variability. You can take your voucher and take it to Whitefish, Montana or anywhere else, but most of the vouchers that we have are used for housing in Davidson County. Although as prices change, there are pressures and where people are actually able to find housing is part of that market dynamic. There are a lot of other sort of specifics to get into on vouchers, and you guys may have other questions, but I'm going to pause from that overview maybe and let folks ask questions about how vouchers work and what we do. But again, let me just say, and I know we have a couple of commissioners, Commissioner Coleman, Commissioner Thaden, who are on this call, and they get to see the great work that Norman and his team do every day to provide housing for about 7,000 families. So as you're sort of thinking about what scale and impact these things have, MDHA owns and operates about 6,200 apartments. Those are buildings that we own and operate, not part of Section 8. That's where we own and operate them. We receive a different kind of federal subsidy to help with the rents in those units. And then an additional 7,000 families are housed every night using a Section 8 voucher. I think you're muted.
Beth, I see your hand went up first, and then after that, I see Kelsey and then Gloria.
So 2 questions for you. One, does Nashville use local area fair market rents? And is that a choice that we can make, which would enable people to rent into different neighborhoods? And second is, given that the housing choice voucher, the public housing, is really the only housing that's affordable to people at the very bottom, should we be restricting the income limits for housing choice vouchers to require people to be below 30% or below 50% of area median to get them?
I can take that. This is thank you for having me. As far as the fair market, we use the county-wide fair market, entire area of Davidson County. We do not use the small area fair market, which is permissible, which is by zip code. As far as the income, the actual income limit for our program is 50. However, 70.
Norman, sorry, this is Emily. Can we address the sound issues? It looks like you're unmuted and it's causing some background noise. Would you mind muting? Thank you. Norman, can you repeat yourself?
Okay, I was going back to the fair market rents. We adopt 100% of the current fair market rent for the area, Nashville, Davidson County area. We do not use the small area fair market rents, which is by zip code. We do have that option, and that is something we're considering. We just recently submitted an application for housing choice voucher mobility, and it would allow us to adopt the small area fair market rents to allow families to go into the lower concentrated areas. As far as income limits, in general, our eligibility income limit is 50% or below for all of our programs. However, 70% or more new admissions have to be at or below.
Were you done there? It sounded like you might have cut out a bit. And Jim, I think you're unmuted again. We're getting some feedback.
Back to the income limit. Our income limit is at 50% or below, but 75% of our families must be at or below 30% of the very median income.
Jim, you have a comment or a question, sir?
Yes. Matt, I've heard that thousands of people are waiting to get into Section 8 housing. Do you have any idea how many people are waiting to get Section 8 housing?
Currently, just over 10,000 families.
Hey Jim, you'll have to mute for us so we can hear clearly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Matt, I've heard that there are thousands of people who are waiting for Section 8 housing. Do you is that true, or what would the number be?
Yeah, Jim, if you would mute real quick, we can answer that question.
Great, thank you.
The short answer to your question is yes, there's about 10,000 people currently on our wait list.
Wow, thank you.
See a hand from Gloria, and then again a hand from Kelsey. And we're gonna need you to mute so we can hear audio without distortion. Thank you.
Did you just call on Gloria?
Yes.
Okay, I have two questions. One, the amount of the voucher, is that based on the need of the individual or the amount of the rent that's being charged? And the second question is, if someone does leave Davidson County with a voucher we have issued, when it's time for that voucher to be renewed, do they come back to Davidson County to get a voucher, or where they are now living? Thank you, and I'll mute again to hear the answer.
All right, this is Norman. The value of the voucher is going to vary. It depends on the family's eligibility, bedroom size, and what their income is. So just say, for example, if the payment standard or fair market rate for a two-bedroom voucher is $1,000, and 30% of that family's income is $300 a month, that value of that voucher is $700. So it's going to vary from family to family depending on the income and their eligibility, bedroom size.
So if the apartment was renting for $1,500, they would still get $1,000, and if the apartment was renting for $1,000, they get $1,000. Is that correct?
No, they would get $700. The payment standard that we use, which is at 100% of the fair market rent, is the basis we use to determine the amount of assistance available. So from that amount, we will subtract 30% of their income. So if 30% of their income is $300 a month, that means their maximum subsidy amount is $700 per month. And then your question
let me,
regarding.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to state the obvious here, because I think maybe I didn't go over it in this conversation, but that's incredibly important when you have things like, say, a pandemic. And it's one of the things that Norman and his team had to manage through, because when a lot of people lose their job at the same time, the value of the subsidy, their incomes go down. So the value of the subsidy of the voucher goes up, but we did not kick people off their vouchers. If they had a voucher, they got to keep a voucher. But what that meant was when we were expecting to be putting out, I'm going to use round numbers, $4 million in payments to landlords, all of a sudden we were putting out $5 million of payments to landlords each month, and we weren't getting any more money from HUD at the time. Now, HUD did, as appropriately so, sort of came up and filled that shortfall, but we have to manage against that. And so there was a period of time where we weren't issuing new vouchers. There is natural churn. I mean, I'm probably stating things that you guys all understand, but there's natural churn as folks die or their incomes exceed beyond the limits. And so there is natural churn, but we don't kick people off, or we've certainly, I don't want to say we've never done that, but I think we really endeavor not to do that. And so we're having to constantly balance between rents, incomes, who's in, who's out, the wages of the individuals who participate in the program. But it is that juggling act that Norman and his team do so well that makes this program so effective at allowing people to actually pay as much as they can pay, but not more than they can pay and still remain in good housing.
I appreciate that. I see the hands of, well, Kelsey, I still need to get to you. So if your hand's still waiting, go ahead. And then I see Kia and then Hunter.
Two questions. First, could you speak to any other requirements for people to be eligible for vouchers other than meeting that maximum income threshold? And then are those set by the federal government or by MDHA? And then separately, the requirements for landlords other than, again, agreeing to keep rents at that fair market related to things like inspections.
Okay. As far as other requirements, HUD does mandate that we not approve an applicant who is in a long-term sex offender registry, and those who have been convicted of manufacturing meth in or around a public housing property. We have other screening criteria. For instance, if somebody owes us a balance, that must be paid off before they can be approved. We do criminal background history. We just focus primarily on convictions of violent criminal or drug-related activity within the last 3 years. As far as the landlord eligibility, there is a landlord debarred list looked at the time a landlord us wanted to rent a unit. It's HUD maintained database. Very, very, very rarely do we ever find a landlord wanting to participate on our program that is on that debarred list. I can't remember the last time that's happened. I do want to go back to Gloria's question about portability. She asks what happens when people port out. When we send a family to another PHA, that PHA has an option to either absorb that voucher or administer that voucher and bill MDHA for the cost to administer that voucher. I don't have specifics as far as how many are absorbed or how many are billed. I know currently we have about 150 families living outside of Davidson County that we are paying the rent to that PHA, and probably half or more are VASH participants who have gone to places like Cookeville, Clarksville, Murfreesboro, places outside of Davidson County. And the reason for THDA is billing us is because they do not administer a VASH program, so they pretty much have to bill us. So I'll be happy to take the next question.
Norman, can you tell people what VASH stands for?
I'm sorry, say again, Emily.
Can you, hey Norman, for us, can you give us the meaning of VASH, the acronym, and as well as its purpose?
I'm sorry. Okay, it is Veterans Administrative Supportive Housing. So it is for homeless veterans. We have just over 500 vouchers, VASH vouchers. All of the referrals come from the VA. If they refer a homeless veteran to us, we issue the voucher and assist them with a privately owned unit.
Norman, can you also share about the pilot we did with the city related to VASH? Because we've had challenges placing those vouchers, so that folks know what we're trying to do to get those placed.
Yeah, we did have a landlord incentive program funded by Metro government in previous years. I want to say it was from 16 through 2020, I think it was. The program was eliminated last year out of the Metro budget, but we did offer a landlord incentive to rent to a homeless veteran, included a $1,000 leasing bonus and provisions that would allow them to be reimbursed for any unpaid rent or damages for up to 2 months rent. So we're hoping to find ways to create another landlord incentive program, not just for the veterans, but for the overall program.
No, that would be great. I like those stipulations. Kia, thank you for your patience. I would like to call on you. Sorry about that.
Yes, thank you so much. This is probably for Norman or Matt or anyone, but I'll start there. I have 3 questions. One, I'm interested in, where do those people live who are those 10,000 families who are on the wait list? Where are they living? So any information or intelligence you have there would be helpful. How many vouchers can be given? So I believe I heard 3 constraints from Matt's presentation, and one of them being the amount of vouchers you can give per year. So can you share that, or over amount of time? And then 3, this is to kind of pick up on Kelsey's question around complaints of landlords, or how you're managing the maintenance or the livability of the housing that they're providing.
Okay. I don't have exact numbers, but a good portion of the families on our waiting list are current public housing participants, or they are in other HUD subsidized housing. Again, I don't have specific numbers, but we do know a lot of them are. Number of vouchers available. We have in all of our programs, as far as the housing choice voucher, just over 7,200 vouchers allocated. Right now, we're probably supporting about 6,600 of those. Excuse me. And that goes back to what Matt was saying about available funding, being able to support all vouchers. We're funded at about just over $600 per voucher. Our average voucher costs us around $700. So doing the math, we cannot support every voucher allocated. So right now we're supporting about 90% of our vouchers and spending all of the money allocated. The third question, complaints of landlords. You know, we do inspections initially and then each year. As far as complaints, I'm not sure. As far as complaints, are you talking about providing the voucher assistance or maintaining, or the way families maintain units, or?
No, sure. I'm asking the quality of the housing that the landlord provides. So do you receive complaints from those people, those tenants who live in the housing?
Well, sure. Of course, if, you know, administering over 7,000 families, we're going to get complaints, but not very often. We address those immediately. We have protocol in place to notify the landlord. This complaint has been received. We ask for your response within 10 days. If they don't respond, then we'll go out and do an inspection. If it's an emergency item, we'll go out electrical problem or a plumbing leak or something like that. We'll go out immediately and verify that and notify the landlord if they have 24 or 48 hours to fix those conditions. Yeah, we do get complaints, but I would say it's a lot. No.
Thank you for that, Norman. I want to do a time check for everyone. I don't see hands up currently. D, I do want to make sure we're conscientious of the time for all of our committee members. Do we have any other orders of business before we move to close, or are there any other things that I need to be concerned about before giving parting words?
I think we're in good shape. We have 5 minutes. I do just want to remind all of our committee members that we appreciate the interest of everybody in the task force. And there are public access numbers for folks who are not members of the task force so that they can join us. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. And we're trying to work closely with everyone to be sure that those public access numbers are made available quickly and easily.
I'd like to really quick recognize my fearless co-leader, Nick. I see your hands up, Nick. Would you like to comment before we depart today?
Just a quick touch on the voucher program. I think one of the key things that didn't come up is, Norman, could you talk a little bit about the success rate of vouchers? Because I think that tells us a really distinct picture of the need for housing in Nashville that doesn't come up otherwise.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, and that's one of the other factors we have to look at on a monthly basis is how many of our newly issued vouchers are able to successfully lease a unit. A couple of years ago, it was teetering around that 50% level. We've seen it increase a little bit to where somewhere between 60 and 65% right now. So that's how many, every newly issued voucher, 65% or so will find a unit and lease. And the other 35% will expire. And it's for various reasons. It could be they have, not so great criminal or credit history or those reasons, or a lack of a suitable unit for the families. So it's various factors there.
Thanks, Norman. And I just, to me, that's it's a little bit heartbreaking, if I'm being honest. Between 30 and 50% of the households that receive a voucher that says you are going to get, if not all, a significant portion of your rent every month, no matter what, still have a hard time finding housing in Nashville. And I think that tells the story of a need that some of the other numbers shed a light on, but not quite in the same sort of way as that does. So thanks, Norman.
No, indeed. And again, and with that, I think it puts what all we're doing, it puts all that in perspective. Moving to close for this evening, we continue as we progress forward. We intend to do as we did this evening. We're going to leverage our task force members, their organizations, their networks, to provide us with information and insights, right, related to enablers as well as constraints around affordable housing, whether that's preservation or creation of units over the next couple weeks. I do again want to emphasize that our ultimate goal is to put together a blueprint and some actionable steps that we can provide to our administration, with the emphasis specifically on a 1 to 3 year time frame, but of course looking further beyond that. As we move to close, I want to thank all of our guest speakers. Greg, I know you will of course defer some of all the efforts to your team, but for all of us, please be sure to thank the planning department and all the work you've been doing. Again, putting in a lot of overtime there. Excuse me. And then also I wanted to thank the guests that we had, Joe Kane, Matt. Thanks for recruiting Norman as well to join us from MDHA. Jeremy, thanks for wearing a hat as a presenter today for sure, providing a lot of great information. Ashley, you've been joining us and you've been learning a lot, but thanks again for what you brought to the conversation today. Happy to have you as always. I would like to say, we did have a few extra questions, this evening, but thanks you all for answering those and weathering those with us. And I look forward to our next meeting. I think, as Dia said, we plan to provide more information about some tweaks and some adjustments to our schedule. But it's all for the greater good, and we plan to communicate that in a fashion that works best with you all and gives you enough heads up to accommodate. you guys have any questions for us? I know we're just now hitting 6:30, but if we don't, I think it's good to end on that note. And again, Dia and I and Mick will be in touch along with our other co-chairs of these committees, and look forward to next week.
Good night.
Night, thanks.
Good night, everybody.